Hello everybody, Miss Melissa here, ready to teach you how to make your very own pumpkin jar using book pages. If you signed up through the library and you came and picked up a kit, you will see that it comes with a jar, a little baby food jar, some book pages that have been torn from discarded books that were already damaged and beyond repair, so we didn't destroy books that weren't already destroyed. And you'll have a tiny little stick as well. The only thing you need to provide at home are an orange crayon or any color that you want to make your pumpkin. Or if you don't want to make your pumpkin a color, if you just want to make it a neutral book page pumpkin, that's fine too. And you'll also need to provide your own white glue. And this can be any kind. This is Target brand. You can use Elmer's glue. It doesn't have to be a name brand though. It can be any kind of just white glue, white school glue. And this is a really simple project. It looks really difficult, but it's really simple. It just takes a lot of time for the glue to dry and to kind of put everything together. But I'm going to walk you through all the steps today. And again, if you weren't able to sign up through the library, or if you're just finding this on your own, all the supplies are really easy to find in your own house. It's just a little jar, some book pages, crayon, glue, and if you want a little stick for the top of the stem of your pumpkin. Now, the first thing you're going to do to make this pumpkin is take your book page and completely color it orange. And I'm going to move my screen here so that you can see. You can follow along with me as I color, but we just want to completely color this page orange. Again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. If you want it to be a really dark color orange pumpkin, then you can press down harder. If you want it to be lighter, you can color a little bit lighter or color a little bit lighter like that, just so you can see. I'm going to try to make it dark just so it's easier for everybody to see that's watching. You're just going to color, color, color. And you might also notice, as you're coloring, that I'm surrounded by paper towels. That's because, as I stated, this is a little messy. So that's something else you might want to have set up before you get to the messy part. This part's fine. And I'm saying that it's messy. I choose to not use a brush when I start gluing everything. But if you have a brush at home and you would prefer to paint with a brush, that is another option. I gave everybody a few sheets of paper. I found I only really needed 2 to cover my pumpkin, but I wanted to give some spares. I recommend coloring and prepping all of the paper before you start gluing, because once you start gluing, like I said, it gets messy and your hands will get messy and you have to stop everything and wash up to get the paper ready. So I say prep as much paper as you think you're going to need before getting started. There's one sheet done, and I'm going to, like I said, prep a second sheet just in case. Again, I provided some pages, but if you wanted to make it a more meaningful pumpkin, if there's a book that you have at home that you have loved to the point of it falling apart, and maybe you've already replaced it or you want to replace it, you could always use books from a book that has meaning to you. You don't have to use the book pages that I provided from just random books. Or maybe that's something you want to think about in the future. If you have a book that falls apart, this is another way to repurpose some of those pages instead of just throwing it away. Again, you want to make sure that it is completely covered with the crayon, because when we start cutting it apart, you will notice the spots that don't have color on them. So just keep on coloring. All right, I think I'm just about done with mine. After you're done coloring, mine is pretty much done, then you are going to cut the paper into strips. Now, how big or small these strips are completely up to you. The first one that I did, if you can look, are pretty teeny tiny strips of paper. I pretty much lined my cuts up with the lines on the text. So I would cut a line, one row of text was one tiny strip of paper to start with. If you are impatient and don't want to cut them that small, that's fine. If you want to make more like squares as opposed to tiny little strips, that's fine too. There's no right or wrong way to cut your paper. I'm going to show you how I did it the first time, and I might do it a little differently this time, I don't know. So yeah, like I said, I pretty much just cut one line like that, one single little line, and then I kind of cut it into thirds to make them like that. That it will take a long time to start to cover your jar like that, but it comes out looking really neat, as you can see. I think I might mix it up a little bit this time and maybe make them slightly bigger. I don't know. Might see how it looks after I start cutting. One thing you might notice is that the borders on your pages do not have any text. They don't have any words. So the first time I did it, I kind of cut those off and didn't include them because I wanted my whole pumpkin to have words on it. So most of this pumpkin, you can see there's only a few little bald spots have words. The rest of them are pretty covered. If you include the edge, you're going to end up with some spots that are covered but not covered with words. And it just depends on what kind of pumpkin you want to make. This is your pumpkin. There's no wrong way to do it. So go ahead and start cutting stuff up. I'm going to keep cutting on mine. And like I said, this time I made them a little bit bigger. So I don't know how long you want to watch me gluing things to a pumpkin. See, next time I got like blocks. Oops. It might also work better for tiny hands that are trying to glue this together. Go ahead and cut. To kind of show how I'm doing it now. Cutting a strip. This time I'm going about 4 rows of text, and then I'm kind of cutting it into 4. So like 1, 2, 3 cuts. Let's get pieces a little bit more square than last time. And again, it doesn't need to be consistent because they're all going to overlap. So it doesn't need to take a lot of time. The smaller the pieces, the longer it takes to cut and the longer it takes to glue. So just keep that in mind. Again, I got a little bit of scrap there. One thing I will point out is that while for the jar itself, you can do nice big pieces, when you get to the top of the jar, if you want it to cover the lid, you're going to need thin pieces in order to do this lip, because this is very thin. And it probably wouldn't hurt to have some small ones for the top too, since there's not as much space to cover. Maybe one big one with some small ones just to cover the space. So it is beneficial to have some small text as well. And you could experiment. I've done it with rectangle shapes, but maybe you want to try all sorts of shapes for your pumpkin. There's no rules on how you have to put this together. I'm just keeping my different shapes in different piles so that I can easily sort through them once I get going, because like I said, once you start gluing, it's very messy and you don't want to be having to stop and wash your hands every couple of minutes. But you can do that too. If you're at home, you can stop and wash your hands and come back to it. Now, I've got my paper all cut and ready to go. Next thing you need to do is get your glue ready. So I've got a cup here. My glue's already ready. You put some glue in the cup, or it might even help to add a little bit of water first so that you don't accidentally put too much water in and end up having to start over. But if you put just a tiny little bit of water in your cup and then mix some glue in, you want it to be a little bit, let me see if I can get a video for you to see. You can see my glue looks a little runny here. It's because I added just a little bit of water. So it still has a pasty texture, but it's not quite as thick as if I were to just put glue. A little water goes a long way, which is why I said you might want to add just a tiny bit of water first and then start mixing the glue in. Because the first time I did this, I put some glue in a cup and then I added water and it was too much water, so I had to dump it all out and start over. And that wastes a little bit of glue, so I'm trying to save you some time. I also recommend not using a cup quite this deep, like this tall. If you have a smaller, shallower cup, that would work better. This is just what I had on hand right now, because you're going to be constantly going into the glue, and if it's easier to access, it's better. Again, I prefer to use my fingers when I'm gluing. That is the messy way of doing this. If you have a paintbrush at home or a little sponge, those are great alternatives to just help keep the mess down. But you don't need to have those if you don't have them at home. So next you're going to get your jar, and you're going to take the lid off, and you can choose which piece you want to cover first. I'm going to start with the jar. Now, you're going to take a piece of paper, with your finger cover it with glue, and then just kind of smear the glue onto the jar. I'm going to lower the camera so that you can hopefully see me do this process. So, there's my paper. I am going to take some glue, nice and messy, and just cover it on top of the paper. You want that paper to get nice and wet so that it molds right onto the jar. And now look, you're also going to see I'm smearing the glue over some of the jar too. I want to get it a little wet. I'm not going to cover the whole jar all at once because that gets really messy, but just kind of around. And now I'm going to put another piece on and then just kind of wipe some more glue on top. And I'm going to keep going with this process until this jar is covered. So go ahead and follow along with me. Again, there's no right or wrong way of putting the paper onto the jar. I keep saying you want to make it covered, but if you would prefer to have holes throughout where you can see inside of the jar, that's fine as well. Just keep covering. You might not be able to get it quite up to the top rim. You want to do not what I'm doing and you don't want to get glue in the rim. So you might not be able to get the paper quite up to the top just because since the jar curves, the paper might not as well, especially if you're using big pieces like I'm using right now. The smaller pieces you can kind of fit in. The larger pieces make it a little bit more difficult for that. You might find that you need a mix of big pieces and little pieces. Maybe you use most of the jar with big pieces and then you come back and use some little pieces to fill in. I think that's looking like that might be what I want to do right now too. And don't worry about the fact that the glue is white all over the place because remember it's going to dry clear. So it's not like you're going to have a bunch of white all over your jar. And you just kind of rotate around. Covering that jar with glue and paper. You can also decide, and you might not care, whether or not the direction of the words. You see, I've kind of got the direction of the text going all over the place. Some of it looks upside down, some of it's right side up. That's a preference. That's something you can choose. And the direction of the paper too might make things look different, whether you make it all stacked or whether I kind of go crooked and I try to mix up the direction. If you ever notice some paper's not sticking, just try to run some more glue over it. It softens up the paper and it kind of helps it meld into where it's supposed to go. And these little jars, once they're done, they can be great gifts or decorations or little trinket holders. There's so many cute things you can use these jars for. Oops. I hope that I'm keeping the jar in the shot because I keep moving it to look at it and I can't. And then I forget that you might not be able to see what I'm doing. So I apologize if you ever lose the visual because I'm looking at the jar funny. I'll try to get it back for you as soon as possible. Now I am getting closer to being done with this pumpkin, or at least the body of the pumpkin. And you can, I don't know if it's easy to see in the video or not, but this is still obviously very, very wet. I said it would take a long time to dry, and I was not kidding. It'll take close to 2 days for it to dry, at least 24 hours. So make sure you have a spot to put this aside so that it can dry. Alright. This might be the last piece for right now. I think I'm going to come back to my jar a little bit after I do the lid. You can see I got my jar mostly covered. And I'm going to move on to do the lid. Like I said, the lid is a little bit trickier because it's got this thin rim that we want to cover. So that's what I'm going to use some of these smaller pieces that I cut. Try to help cover that because you can see that one little line, as you can see, kind of fits perfectly on the rim of the jar. Oops. Remember, you want to put glue underneath and on top of the paper to help it stick and stay. And then once you get the top part done, I think I'm going to do kind of a combo of some of the big ones and the little ones to cover the top plate. Nothing like a nice messy project for fun and creativity. You can also, it gets a little tricky once your fingers are covered in glue, but you can tear up some of those strips to get them to fit the spots that you need them to fit in. Got some gaps I want to fill on the top. Just remember, once they start to dry in your fingers, they will rip a little because it's just paper. And once the paper starts to dry onto glue, it gets stuck, even if it's on your finger. And I can feel the glue starting to dry my fingers now. So I've been at this for a while. That nice milky shine means that this is completely covered in glue. It's bathed in glue. But I would rather have a little extra glue and have to wait a little longer for it to dry than to have all of the paper fall off as soon as it starts to dry because there's not enough of a base. You can also kind of spread it around too. I think now that I know I've got a little bit of extra strips, I'm going to use some of them to kind of fill in the gaps that I have on my jar. Oops. Yeah, so one thing I'm noticing is with these bigger pieces, it takes a little bit more glue to get them to hold down rather than the smaller ones. So just be aware of that. All right, in there, I've got a jar. It's fully covered in paper as well as a lid that's fully covered in paper. I'm going to put that stuff aside. Try to wipe some of this glue off of my fingers. Now, you wait for it to dry. Once your project is dry, and like I said, it can take like up to 2 days for that glue to dry, you have a little stem in your kit, and you can take it and stick it right on to the top. You can try doing this with regular glue. If you have like a crafting glue or a hot glue gun, it should only take a couple of dots of glue to get this to hold in place. And you've got this cute little pumpkin jar. Like I said, you can use this to store things in it. It should still open once your project is done. It'll still open and close. You can use it just as a decoration on a table. You can use it as like a favor. You can give it as a gift. There's so many wonderful ways to use this project. If you ever wanted to do another one, like I said, you can pull pages from an old book that you have, maybe that it's falling apart, it's beyond repair. This is a great way to reuse book pages and recycle. I love a good recycling craft. As you can tell, this is almost all recycled between the book pages and the empty baby food jars. And I use the baby food jars because they're cute and they're tiny and they're round. But if you have larger jars, like a pickle jar or a jam jar, any kind of jar you can do this with. You'll just need a lot more paper. I hope you enjoyed making these pumpkins with me. Please feel free to email me pictures if you're doing this live. I would love to see the pictures of the pumpkins that you create. You can email at egchildren@gmail.com. And another fun idea is I know it's past Halloween, but if you wanted to cut out some black construction paper or black Sharpie and draw a little jack-o'-lantern face on your pumpkin, you could do that. The possibilities are endless. So thank you for following along. I hope you enjoy your pumpkins, and good luck. Thank you, everybody. Bye.